Right, shall we fire away then with just a
Yes,
couple of
please.
words on the first wine, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail into the Domaine, but you're pretty familiar with the Domaine. But 2007 is an unheralded vintage for white Burgundy and indeed for red, but one which I'm extremely fond of. And if people made the right decision, I think they've made some very good wines. So it was almost a record earlier flowering. It's been beaten since just about 2020 and 2011 maybe, but 2007 was an incredibly early flowering. It was the year that President Sarkozy won his election in May, and from the day he was elected, it pretty much rained for the rest of the summer. No deliberate connection, but that's the way it was. So it ended up in both colours being a little bit of a lighter vintage, but because the spring had been so good and the flowering was so good, it means that the grapes ripened at the end of August, very beginning of September. And lots of people picked in August. It was one of the first vintages after 2003, when we began to get August harvest. And most people did their usual thing of picking the whites first and then the reds. And this was actually clearly the wrong thing to do in 2007, because the reds had ripened and the leaves were dying and there was no more ripening really was going to happen if you left them on the vine. But the whites were underripe. They were okay for sugar and they were okay for acid, but they didn't really have any flavor to them. And the Chardonnay vines were holding out better than Pinot vines. So Dominique Lafon was one of the smart guys who waited. So a few people picked in August. Everybody else started on Monday, the 3rd of September. The weather was okay that week, quite good even. It was better the following week. And Dominique basically picked his whites from during the week of the 10th of September. And it didn't change the sugar levels and it didn't change the acidity levels. But what it did do was give much more flavor in the grapes. So Clos de la Barre is a vineyard that always flowers early but ripens late. It's the back garden, if you like, of the house where Dominique was born, and the family who continued to live. His mother lives there still, and she's 5 years older than La Louise Loire, I can reveal, but she's in excellent health, full of energy, still drives, goes to the market and all the rest of it. So the 2007 Clos de la Barre should, I would guess, be at its perfect drinking point. Looking from here, I think I can see that the color is still very friendly, no real age in that. It's never going to be a massively powerful vintage, but it should be a really pretty wine. And there's always a good mineral thread in the Clos de la Barre. There's a vineyard called En la Barre next door, and then the Clos de la Barre, the other side of the road, is entirely enclosed in quite high walls, apart from the end with the house at the top and the rose garden. But it's a very special village wine. I'm not suggesting it should ever be Premier Cru, but it's a wine with its own personality. And I'm glad your bottle is showing well tonight, because this, of course, was in a period in which Premox was a risk, but I've never had much in the 2007 vintage from Dominique. So as well as that, he has a straight Meursault, and he has a wine which they sell as village, Meursault Désiré, but actually it comes from the Premier Cru Santenots, and so it could have been sold as Premier Cru, but they've always preferred to call it by their sort of pet family name of the desired one, Désiré. And the authorities said, Désiré is fine if you want to, but you can't use Premier Cru designation. You'd have to call it Meursault Santenot if you wanted Premier Cru. And they took the decision that they felt it was only village quality, so they'd stick with Désiré. So that's a quick briefing of village wines. One of the skills of this domain is that when it was founded in 1869, when the Bosch family, B-O-C-H, or Bock maybe, moved to Meursault and built the house. But it was then a Miss Bock or Bosch married the Comte Jules Lafon in 1894, January 1894, and that was really the start of it all, because at that point the Comte Jules Lafon bought lots of vineyards, particularly in Meursault and Volnay, but later on Montrachet. But his great skill was that he bought the vineyards, he bought plots which were really well situated in all the vineyards. Whereas another domain that started about the same time, and you can tell because the house and the cellars were built at the same time and the architecture is much the same, was Domaine Perrieres. And there, the original Jacques Perrieres took a very different view. He also went out and bought loads of vineyards, but he bought the grandest names like Montrachet, Champans, Musigny, etc. But he bought what he could. He went for the top names, but he didn't necessarily get the best placings within those vineyards. And Lafon said, no, I'll stick with my local villages, local appellations, but try and get the best plots. So it's both valid approaches, but it's an interesting difference. What we're going to do today otherwise is your next 6 wines in the pre-match tasting are going to be the 6 premier crus of Meursault. Then, of course, we have to have a Montrachet, and we will have the probably the best known, certainly, of the red wine vineyards. We will do another version of this, perhaps next year, certainly the year after, if not, in which we will maybe look at all the red wine vineyards, as well as staying with the whites. And then, obviously, after that, you have got some beautiful older wines. Before I leave, I'll talk about those vintages. I don't know how many glasses you have got. Will you get the 3 2012s together?
Yep.
Okay, so while those are coming round, I'll say a little bit more about more recent history, because Dominique Lafon's father, René Lafon, who retired in 1982, he ran the domain, but at a distance. There was a team that did the vineyards, and they had sharecroppers who would look after the vineyards, the most famous of whom was Pierre Moret. So at the end of it, Pierre Moret would deliver some of the grapes to Domaine Lafon and would keep some of the grapes for himself. And he had a cellar master as well, who would sort of look after making the wines under the instructions of René Lafon. But Lafon was a sort of university teacher in thermal engineering, and so he was sort of at one remove. I mean, yes, he lived on the property, but was semi-absentee landlord. And it was the next generation, initially Dominique and his brother Bruno Lafon, who started running the domain after 82. They don't seem to want to claim 83 and 84, but Dominique now typically says it was 85 when he took over. And they didn't really get on, the two brothers. And so it was Dominique on his own after that time. And various things have evolved since then. During the 1990s, he took the domain first organic and then biodynamic. So Anne-Claude Leflèvre and Lalou Biche-Leroy were ahead, but then Dominique followed on very, very shortly after them. And of course, during the later 80s, he was taking back the various sharecropping arrangements when each 9-year lease finished. Then he gave notice in advance and said, okay, I'm going to take back that contract, and because I want to do the vines myself, which you're allowed to do. So, which is, unfortunate for people like Pierre Moret and the others, but it's a normal way of things to happen, and everybody understood and didn't cause them any problems. So by the early 90s, he got on the vineyards, he started moving them biodynamic, and actually they then expanded at the end of the 90s by starting to buy some vineyards in the Mâconnais. And then since then, the next expansion was in 2011, when they got more village Meursault to go into the village Meursault blend, plus 3 new premier crus, which came in from the joint purchase with Rouleau of a domain where there was no succession plan. So that brought in the Boucheres, the Poruzot, and they already had the Goutte. So in fact, they just got 2 new premier crus. And then Dominique had been having some problems with premature oxidation. So as well as doing all sorts of researches about how the wines were being made, to try to get around the problem. He also in 2013 went to the Diam corks in order to make sure that he could really escape from any risk. Right, so you have got the 3 2012s. It was a very small vintage because of hail. I mean, every vineyard in each of the village, Dominique Lafon, under his own label plus the family label, they have vines in 6 different villages in the Côte de Beaune. Chassagne Montrachet for the Montrachet, Puligny for a wine he makes himself, Beaune for a wine he makes himself, Montlhy, Volnay, and Meursault. And every single one of those villages and every single plot that they have got hailed at one point or another during 2012. So it was a very small crop, and in fact, I didn't get any allocation at all personally of his 2012s, the only year I've missed. So I'll be fascinated to hear back from you how they're all showing. Let's start with Boucheres. So that's one of the new ones. Now this, in fact, is the plot that Jean-Marc Rouleau used to have. But when the acquisition that they jointly made in 2011 brought something called the Clos des Boucheres, which is in the top left corner of the Boucheres on the map, when that was part of it, Jean-Marc said, I want to take the Clos des Boucheres entirely for myself, and instead I will cede to you, Dominique, the Boucheres that I used to have. So these are the vines which up to 2010 were Jean-Marc Rouleau vines, and now they're Dominique. But both Jean-Marc and Dominique are in agreement that you've got to pick Boucheres early. If not, the sugar levels start to shoot up and the wines become heavy and clumsy. So there should be a softness, a silkiness, an elegance about this wine, which will be easier to see when you've had all 3 and indeed all 6 of the Premier Crus. But typically these days, Boucheres is probably going to be the first wine that Dominique will serve out of the 6. Voila. So shall I talk about the other 2 and then we'll chat together about how the 3 are showing? Yeah, you have all. Yeah, you've got them all. Okay, then Genevrieres, which is one of the original, in fact, way back from even before Comtes Lafon, they had the Genevrieres, and it's become a strong favorite. It is not the most powerful of the Premier Crus, because Perrieres and Champans and even sometimes Goutte probably going to be more powerful, but it just has this really sublime sense of detail about it and finesse. Genevrieres, the name comes from juniper, and they have a juniper tree planted next to this big vineyard. He's in the upper part, which is fractionally the better in Genevrieres, but it's not that important. And several of you I know were at the, it was basically a Genevrieres Lafon presentation that we put on in that very room, possibly the last time before lockdown, the first lockdown. I think it was your birthday, Richard, when we did that, so it would have been in January of that year, of 2020, unless it was the year before. But it's frequently my favorite, and the 81 and the 82 vintages, the last 2 of René Lafon, were both absolutely striking wines, and ones which I have used to mark various rites of passage in my life ever since. So I shall enjoy sharing any bottles with you, should you have any in your cellars. But the 2012, it should still be pretty young. I'm guessing it will have a little bit more tension in the wine than the Boucheres. The Boucheres will be more of a cashmere texture, and the Genevrieres a little bit more detail. I didn't check beforehand to see if I've got any tasting notes of late. I don't think I have on the website. But that's probably going to be the classiest of the 3 2012s. After that, we have Goutte, which is a small vineyard, and everybody has rows that go sort of up and down the slope in Goutte. It's a wine which tends to be a little bit richer probably, than either Boucheres or Genevrieres. A little bit of what Clive Coates would call Foursquare, sort of a chunkier style, a little bit less finesse, a little bit more muscle, definitely a food wine. Not really, and so you can have some of your chips with it, your French fries. But it's I'll be interesting to hear back from you your preferences between these three. Though Sebastian mentioned that possibly that wine is fractionally flawed. That may be the case. Just also to put them in one other form of context, the Boucheres, the Lafons have 0.30 of a hectare. I'm just going to turn my inbox off so you don't get noise of incoming emails. Boucheres 0.30, Genevrieres 0.55, and Goutte 0.39. So 0.55 would give Dominique sort of 6 to 8 barrels, 8 barrels, maybe 8 to 10 barrels, maybe in a good vintage, and the others would be more like 5 or 6 barrels. So they're still relatively rare items. Any thoughts to come back on the Boucheres and the Genevrieres, given that the Goutte d'Or is not quite singing?
Both are showing very well. I'd say the Barre is maybe more ready. These still are young. Showing quite nice.
Yeah, I would, Jasper, I would say that the Genevrieres has a little bit more kind of finesse and a little bit more complexity, use that word, than the Boucheres, which is lovely, but it's kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it should do, is what you'd expect it to. And Dominique has got sort of 2 price points between his Premier Crus, with Genevrieres, Champans, and Perrieres, I think, selling a little bit more expensively than the Poruzot, Boucheres, and Goutte d'Or. But I often find there is a little bit of a parallel between Clos de la Barre and Genevrieres. They both do have a little bit more of minerality and salinity than most of the others. But the Genevrieres has got both more depth of flavour, but also there should be more nuance in the Genevrieres. And the Boucheres is just a charmer with wonderful elegance, as I say, a cashmere texture. That's what I would be expecting out of the Boucheres. Great. They should all develop, all those. I mean, you won't have quite enough opportunity to see them all develop if you've got to bring forward the next 3, but nonetheless, they should give you a pretty good view. I wouldn't expect 2012 to be fully ready yet. I would think you've probably got another 3 to 5 years to go, but it should be open enough to see what's going on. Whereas 2011 is a vintage which has many parallels with 2007, insofar it was an extremely early flowering because of a beautiful spring, followed by a not such great summer. So everything was ready to pick early. Again, it's a vintage that started in August, but it doesn't have the density of the great years. What I've found is that some of the cuvées from Lafon are definitely pretty much getting fully ready to drink in 2011 whites, and some, including the more grown-up ones like Champans and Perrieres, are still. But I mean, they're not horribly backward, but you can still see that there's more to deliver. And actually, with a group of Danish friends here in my village in Bouillon, about 2 weeks ago, I did a tasting of Champans, Genevrieres, Perrieres. They spent in the afternoon. They went and to the little crossroads in the vineyards where you're absolutely in the middle of Champans, Genevrieres, and Perrieres. And then in the evening, I led them through a tasting when we had those 3 vineyards from each of Bouchard, Perrier, Fils, Domaine La Tour Giraud, which is undervalued, incidentally, definitely one to take a look at, particularly for the Genevrieres. and also Boyer Martineau, another good name. And then they were all young wines, 18s and 19s. And then I dipped into my cellar and I produced the 2011s of Charmes, Genevrieres, and Perrieres. So you've got two of those now. Your Genevrieres was 12, but Charmes and Perrieres, and mixed in between them is the Poruzot. And probably, in fact, the order of tasting would be the Poruzot first, then the Charmes, then the Perrieres. But it doesn't matter all that much because Poruzot is a wine with good grip, good power as well. So I'll talk about them, the order that they are listed. Charmes is the biggest of the Lafon vineyards, 1.90 hectares. And apart from a recent acquisition of a tiny amount, which is lower down, all the rest of it is in one big block, right at the top of the vineyard, just below the Clos de Perrieres, which is supposed to be the sweet spot of the Meursault Perrieres vineyard. So it's really, really well placed. It being a big vineyard, there's lots of different ages of vines here, but you know they're properly mature. Genevrieres is a good age as well. Here we have the 2011, as I say, nice vintage, and it's properly ready now. When I was tasting them out of barrel, I couldn't fault them on sort of fruit quality, on acidity, or alcohol. All the structural elements were absolutely correct. The only thing which I didn't get out of it, which would have made it a top vintage, was I didn't see quite enough personality of sort of flavor characteristic of each vineyard. That would have catapulted it up to the top. But it's a very nice vintage in white, and I think better in white than red. Though it doesn't reach the heights of 2014 or 2017. Charmes, as I've just said, is he's got a perfect emplacement. His father always served the Charmes before the Genevrieres and Perrieres because he felt it was less good than Genevrieres or Perrieres. Dominique serves Genevrieres first now, not because he thinks Charmes is superior, but just because Genevrieres is about detail and elegance and nuance, and Charmes is more about weight and power, and he feels that sometimes the Genevrieres might get crushed behind the Charmes. But it's also the other thing to say about Charmes is of all his vineyards, it's the one that changed the most with biodynamic treatments. Genevrieres hardly changed at all because they were just getting it completely right beforehand. But Charmes did because it tended to be a little bit bulky and a little bit clumsy. Now you still see the weight and the power and the broadness of it, but it's in a much better balance. There's a little bit more acidity in the wine than there would have been in the pre-biodynamic days, a bit more precision. So it's retained its character, but it's refined it, is what I would say.
When did he go by? What year was that? What year did he go biodynamic?
Well, through the second half of the 90s, really. So by the 2000s, then you could properly see the effect of it. Then we have Poruzot, which is very interesting. There are three little plots in Poruzot. It's slightly lower down. It's sort of next to Genevrieres, but just a little bit. It's adjacent to on the north side and a tiny bit below. Dominique's only got a small holding here. Oh no, no, he's all right in Poruzot. He's just under a hectare, 0.96. The fascinating thing about this, and I've only just started to understand it, I always felt it was a little bit not what Clive would call a four-square wine, but whereas the Charmes is very rounded, and the Poruzot is a bit more rectangular in shape. If you can sort of make a shape of the wine that you're tasting in your mouth. But the thing which I've understood this year is that it actually has some tannins, and I don't know why. It's not to do with the wood take up. And I see it in everybody's Poruzots. When you taste it, think about it at the end of your mouth, and if it just does give you a feeling that's a little bit like tannins in red wines, not as pronounced, but it is something which is characteristic of this particular location. Just in terms of oaking, since I mentioned that, the Charmes and the Perrieres get the most oak. To begin with, it's up to 70%, well, 2 barrels and 3 maybe new, and then after the end of the first year, they get racked out of new barrels into older barrels. The other Premier crus get less than that, no more than half. And Dominique, like many other people, has been reducing new oak anyway. Only the Montrachet used to get 100%, and in 2020, even that has been taken out of 100% new oak. The village wines get no new oak. So all the wines stay in their initial barrels through the first year, and are then racked out of one cellar into another cellar, back into barrel, maybe sometimes 1 or 2 cuvées, if Dominique thinks they don't need any more wood, might go into tank. But broadly speaking, they're back into barrel for a second winter, and then they're bottled at some point between Easter and midsummer, or even into July of the following year. So it's still quite a long maturation process compared to most people. And the last one is the Perrieres. There are 2 main blocks of Perrieres, plus a third small one. The biggest block is right on that crossroads between Perrieres, Genevrieres, and Champans. So Perrieres and Genevrieres are the upper parts of the crossroads, and the biggest block is immediately adjacent there. So that's the lower part of Perrieres, which is thought to be the better part, at the northern end. There's one small block of just a few rows, also in the lower part, but much further down towards the south, the other side of the Clos des Perrieres. And there's a little bit, but Dominique only got this plot in 2010. The vines are in bad condition. They hardly give him, they give him almost no crop for the size of the holding. And so he's pulled them out about a year ago. He pulled them out. So together the 3 make 0.91. So he's got a reasonable holding of Perrieres as well as Poruzot, but only half what he has in Champans. So Perrieres should have the most of everything. It should have at least as much weight as Champans, possibly more, but it should also have more of a mineral feel, a bit more detail, an extraordinary intensity and length. And it should be like Champans plus Genevrieres together. So you have the 3 in front of you. I'm not expecting any of them to be too backward, but certainly the Perrieres, probably the Champans, maybe the Poruzot ought to taste as though they've still got a little bit more to unveil later on. Thoughts back?
You're spot on the Perrieres.
Yeah,
Right.
very good.
Also, Genevrieres is very good.
Yeah. Hey, you're a conformist, Michael. You're going with the official classification, but I mean, I do think there is a there is a definite difference between. I'm with you in having Perrieres. If we were doing 6 wines of any vintage, I would certainly find the Perrieres and Genevrieres to be clearly my favourites. Small drop back to Champans, then Poruzot probably, or Boucheres, depending on the mood I'm in and what I want. And Goutte is the one which generally I like slightly less. I mean, but it's only a very small difference between those 3: Boucheres, Goutte, and Perrieres, and Poruzot.
Jasper, who has the biggest plot of Perrieres?
Good question. That would be because it comes in 2 parts. That would be Albert Griveau, between their 2 parts. I will let's have a little look. But I've got the list here in front of me. Surprised that no one has brought a certain book in with them to find out. But right, Perrieres, here we have Albert Griveau, 1.55, Bouchard Perrieres in 3 plots, 1.20, Chateau de Meursault, 1.10. The former Domaine Ompo 1, Albert Griveau, Griveau has 1.55 and then 0.95, so they have 250 in total. Then Lafon 91, after that, also with a reasonable size, half a hectare or more, you would have Heights-Lochedet, Boyer-Martineau, Cocheturie, Gonu, Matro, Moret, Pierre Moret, and Michelot. There you go.
Jasper, which part of Perrieres is the best area? And then within that area, sorry, the top part or the bottom part, and then within the that better part, where is it within there on the holders of the best part of Perrier?
Okay, a good question, and somebody's done a map of all the Perrier vineyards, so you can get, if you Google it, you might be able to find that, and you've got everybody's holdings on it. But let's think. What can I tell you about that? So it's the bottom half, i.e., you've got the road, which is effectively the Route des Grands Crus, and Perrier is entirely above it. Genevrieres either side of it, and Champans is entirely below it. So the best bit is the bit that's adjacent to the Route des Grands Crus. So that starts with Lafon. You've got, not sure if I remember everybody, but Goutte is also in the middle. And geographically, between north and south, the Clos de Perrieres is pretty much in the middle, and you can see that as a walled clos. And the owner tried to get that promoted to Grand Cru on its own, and he thought that everybody else in Meursault would support this idea. But not surprisingly, since it was only his bit of the vineyard he wanted to promote, not surprisingly, they didn't. But then higher up, Aux Perrieres and Perrieres Dessus, DSSUS, are actually pretty good, but they're probably a little bit behind. They're more directly on the rock. They probably don't have the same intensity. That's where the tiny third plot of Lafon is. Next to him is Costurie. Next to him is Darvieux-Perrin, where you can expect really exciting things with the return of the sun to take over, as from 2020 vintage. One of the Boucheres plots is up there. I think Boyer-Martineau may be up there. Haven't done my homework sufficiently to be able to give you every single person exactly where their plots are. But I know how I can find out. In fact, I will have the copy of Bourgogne Aujourd'hui magazine, which will have printed this, and I should have it next door to me, and I should be able to find that. I can just checking on an Excel sheet of when they did Perrieres, so I get the right copy out. That is issue 121. I will leave the screen for a second.
So it's the Sous or the Sous?
Yeah, it's so wretched French that they have virtually identical words for upper and lower. But yeah, déçu is what you want, which also sounds almost exactly the same as their word for disappointed, which is déçu spelled D-E-C-S-D-L-U, would be pronounced a very similar way.
When you look at
Right, here we go. I should have pretended I have remembered all this and not told you I'm cribbing it from the magazine. But from the top north in the lower part, which we've established as the best part, it goes in order: Lafon, Philippe Boucheres, Latour Giraud, Jacques Prieur, Heights Lochadet, Vincent Dancer. Dancer and Lochadet are always next door to each other because they come from the same family. Rouleau, Matreau, more Heights Lochadet, Ballot-Millau, another really good address in Meursault. Then Albert Griveaux, then Jean-Michel Goutte, then the Clos de Perrieres, Albert Griveaux, then Michel Boucheres, Potinay-en-Pau, Domaine-en-Pau, Pituzet-Prieur, the other bit of Lafon, Michelot, Pernod-Bellicard, Vincent Latour, Bouchard-Paris-Fils, Henri Germain. There you go. And then the upper bits, which are still very good, but I would argue fractionally less good, you have got Lafon, Costurie, Darvieux-Perrin, Bouchard, more Costurie, Domaine Moinjean, not very well known, Michel Bouchereau, Chateau de Meursault, Yves Boyer-Martineau, and Pierre Moret. There you go. Right, repeat that back to me. See who's a good, who's a good student.
Jasper, you mentioned Enpau.
Yes.
I remember actually both his Volnay and also the Meursault Perrieres, but incredibly long-lived wines that were released years, after sitting in the Domaine for years. I mean, what happened to that Domaine? Is it still?
No, Michel Enpau had a stroke and was close to retiring age. And so he thought, right, I'm going to stop doing it. And he is somebody called Eric Germain, who is the winemaker and technical director for the Vincent Girardin Negociant label, has taken over running most of the plots. And credit to him, because he got 2021 spot on during the frost, and he saved most of his crop by lighting lots of candles and doing it early. So most of the vineyards are managed by Eric Germain, who then has the fruit for the Vincent Girardin label. And when I was tasting recently at Latour Giro, Jean-Pierre Latour said, oh, by the way, you know, you do realize we did meet for the first time about 30, 35 years ago. And I said, really? And he said, yes, because after the Pollet de Meursault, and some of you, Richard certainly, and some of the others of you may have been to Pollet de Meursault, but you know, you're completely out of your tree by sort of 6 o'clock in the evening. But my host on that occasion was Jean-Philippe Fichet. And Fichet said, right, we're going to go and taste at Ompo. It's incredibly difficult to get a tasting there, but he said he'll open up his cellar for me and a couple of friends, including you, this evening. So let's go there. So I barely remember the journey to get to the cellar. I don't remember tasting anything while we were there. I have the haziest memory. But apparently in my drunken state, I didn't allow my brain to come in at all. And I picked every single wine, which were all served blind. I got them all right. So I've never been known to do this ever again. And Jean-Pierre Latour told me this again. He reminded me. I heard from Fichet the next morning, they got them right. And Ompo's never been known to give a bottle of wine away ever. Delivered 6 bottles of wine to the house the following day as a sort of congratulations. And Jean-Pierre, thank you. Jean-Pierre Latour confirmed that. So it is rare. I've tasted with you on a number of occasions blind and haven't particularly distinguished myself in your pairs tastings, but nonetheless, on that occasion, I drank too much to allow my brain to interfere. It was purely my right. All this gives you time. Do you have the Montrachet in your glass?
No,
Not yet.
Not yet.
Coming.
So then briefly, of the 6 premier crus, it's Perrieres first and Genevrieres second, or just those 2? The faves.
So,
Yeah.
I like the first one.
I like the first one.
Good. Me too. I'm liking the Poruzot more and more in general.
Poruzot, then Genevrieres.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The turkeys in the
The Montrachet. So it's Lafon, which is great news. It's Montrachet, which is great news. It's 2014, that wonderful white wine vintage. And it's also by now under a Diam, the only wine that you would have tasted, you will taste, in fact, in this your entire evening, which is under a Diam cork. The very first year, 13, Dominique didn't change how he managed his sulfur regime, which you should do if you're going to use Diam. You should use less sulfur. So the 13s were very brutal to begin with. It's all resolved now, but they were brutal to begin with. 14s, I think, should be better. So I'm sure you're familiar. The Lafon holding of Montrachet is the very last one of all, going from north to south. It's adjacent to the road. It forms a nice big block, 1/3 of a hectare, at the, let's call it the southeast corner of the vineyard. So it's on a reasonably steep slope, as the slope goes in purely down to the south towards Chassagne Montrachet here. He's got Romney Conti just above him, and I'm not sure who's next on the other side. Yeah, so it's a vineyard which is quite old now, and it was quite degenerate, and he thought he might have to bring it out, pull it out. But he found, when he went to biodynamics, he actually found that the vines regained a little bit of energy and became a bit less degenerate. I try and pick it every year, if Dom gives me the advanced thumbs up that that's what they're going to do on that day. And it's a really quite difficult vineyard to pick, because the grapes are very, very small, and the bunches are small and the individual grapes are small, and they're sort of hidden in the foliage. Whereas a younger vineyard in sort of greater health would have probably more bunches, and they'd be bigger bunches, and they'd all be in the same part of the fruiting zone, and it'll be much easier to pick. But here you've really got to search for them and make sure you don't miss any. But because they're such small bunches, they have a really good intensity of flavor. So I'm guessing this wine is going to be ludicrously young still, but I hope it will give you a little bit of a sense of what it's all about. 14 was another small crop after hail. In the best ever year, I think that they managed to make 6.5 barrels. Normally they'd be pleased with 4.5 barrels. 14 might have been a bit less than that. So, thoughts back? How's it showing?
Yeah, spectacular.
Yeah, it's a knockout.
Right.
It's definitely like a level above.
Level above, yeah. Well, it needs to be from a price point of view, but save me an empty glass, and when I come by in 18 months' time, I'll come and sniff it.
Like you said, Doug, it's like a barrel sample.
Really? Yeah, gosh.
Really young.
So,
It's really young.
you could drink. It's very balanced. It's very barrel sample.
You can tell the difference straight from the smelling it. It's just got a different level of aromatics to all the others.
Complexity is huge.
It's like putting all the others together and you've got all that.
Yeah.
Come through.
Yeah.
Michael, you say complexity is huge. It's opened up enough so you can see the complexity, has it? Because sometimes it's just a sort of a wall of flavor, but you can't pull out the details when it's as young as this.
It's not a block. It's nuance. It's so primary, but yet there's so much there.
Mm.
I can see where it's going.
But it's not integrated.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's in parts.
It's not knit together.
Right.
That will take time, right?
Yeah, well, look, don't guzzle it all now, but keep that glass and just keep smelling it all the way through, the meal. I would suggest, because it will give you so much more. Maybe Michael, is it too late to say don't guzzle it for you?
Sorry, all gone.
Jasper, how long does it take for it to come around and get balanced and really show its true potential?
Well, I would think a vintage like 2014, which I think is a very reserved vintage because there's good acidity in that year. I would really only want to drink the Montrachet after 20 years old. The first vintage ever of Lafon, they bought the vineyard in 2019, but the first year they actually made a wine themselves was 1935, and I've been privileged to drink that at the Domaine on an occasion when they did some, and it was still in great form. So I've had prematurely oxidized bottles of, including once at Amuse-Bouche with several of you would have been present. I think we had maybe the 2001. And once on that same visit, the night before in Pure, we had a vintage that was a little bit oxidized, maybe 99, but it cheered up during the course of the evening. And then the evening in Amuse-Bouche, it started dead and stayed dead, unfortunately. But aside from any premature oxidation issues, it's a wine which should age endlessly.
So Jasper, I just had another one at Pure, and it was absolutely glorious.
Yay!
Yeah.
Good.
Oh,
Well, all supports my theory that premature oxidation is a period the wines go through, but not more than that. So while you go on enjoying that you've got one, do you know, I'm almost going to suggest that you do better to have that 90 alongside the 76 and the 85 with your dinner, so that you can go on drinking. You can go on drinking whites straight through rather than having a break for the red. If you haven't served it yet, which I don't think you have, does that make sense?
sure. Then why don't we do the 92 Montrachet while you're here?
Yes.
No, I should get even more jealous. What I'll do instead, no, you shouldn't do the 92 because you should do the 09 Genevrieres, then the 96 Perrieres, then the 92 Champans, then the 92 Montrachet would make more sense for your dinner. But what I'll do instead is I'll talk to you a little bit about 21 and 20, But I've already did touch on 21, such small crop, but really aromatic whites, lower alcohols, but correct alcohols, and acidity at the moment showing quite high, but there will be more malic acidity, so that will settle down and balance. The 2020s that I've been tasting for the last 5 weeks, the whites are amazingly good and they're completely consistent. Everybody seems to have made good whites. They're a cross between 14 and 17, probably more often like 17. The people who pick early and want to make really intensely mineral wines like Jean-Marc Rouleau, it's more like 14. More often it's like 17. Whether it's better than 17 or as good as 17, I think may depend, and certain sellers, can't remember exactly who's who and what's what. But in general, it's right up there. So it's a major white Burgundy vintage without question. And what is weird is that the whites and the reds have behaved in totally different ways in 2020. The whites are fresh, energetic, no tasting of none of the sort of the honeysuckle and peach and sort of super ripe flavors. They're all spot on, correct, ideal ripeness flavors. Plus this really good acidity behind, which is an acidity which will stay with the wines and keep them young and fresh for a long time. The reds vary. To begin with, I was really downhearted because I was going to white domains for people who had a few reds as well. And a lot of the reds were tasting ugly and overripe and difficult, with lots of tannins and high acidity and overripe flavors. The more I've gone on tasting the reds, the more I've got to people who specialized in reds and they've made the right picking choices. Then there are some brilliant wines for the long term, but it is going to be much less even than the whites. And it really is going to be a question of checking whether this producer got it right or that producer didn't get it right. And even within a producer, there may be 2 or 3 wines which went over the top, because the intelligent people, they tasted the grapes and they switched from the normal program and they picked all the reds first and then the whites. Those who just went with their normal, we do whites before we do reds, or waited until the skins tasted completely ripe, they ended up with 15.5 degrees alcohol and, to my way of thinking, ugly wines. So not everybody's going to get it right by any means.
Who has gone a white that you've tasted?
I'd rather wait till I've gone sort of all the way through, and I've only done 1 day so far in the Côte de Nuit. I've got a feeling it's going to be better in the Côte de Nuit comparatively than the Côte de Beaune. But who do I remember who got the reds? Lafarge, completely, utterly, mind-blowingly good. Amongst the Beaune Négociants, so Camille Giroux, amazingly good. Ben Leroux, really good. Boucheres, not bad. Shadow, pretty good. Haven't done them all. I've still got a couple more to do. Dangeville is good in Volnay, but I think Lafarge is the winner for me. I mean, what I want to do is I need to get to the end of it and refine my thoughts, because I'm still learning. I'm still building a picture of the 2020 reds, whereas I'm comfortable about my understanding of 2020 whites. But so 1 more month of busy tastings.
Jasper, we should ask you again in December.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Maybe with the Rousseau one, if we don't have anybody from Rousseau there, that will be the time to do it, rather than when we have a guest vigneron, a Griveau or a Genevrieres. Wonderful. Well, it's about time that you metamorphosed into the dinner part of your evening. Any last question? Did you get an extra wine just then, or I saw another glass come round?
Every
09. Yeah. Do you remember that was the 09s absolutely shone when we did the Meursault Genevrieres tasting, and I'm sure it will be again tonight. It's in these richer vintages, which people think of as red wine vintages, the people who were intelligent enough to pick early enough from their whites, so 09 and 15, have often made stunning whites, which, and for me, it's almost my favorite vintage for Dominique Lafon era Lafons. 09. I just think he nailed it completely, and it sounds as though it's working for you as well.
Almost. So then, what is your favorite vintage then?
I only said almost to leave myself some wiggle room in case on another occasion, I want to praise another one. I can't think of one which I would clearly say was better. But let's put it that way. Lovely. Well, look. Any more?
Last question.
Yeah.
You've known Dominic for many, many years.
Yes.
What's the best wine you both have ever shared together?
Well, one which is a great memory for us was the 1982 Montrachet, which we both, the first time he tasted it in bottle, and the first time I tasted it in bottle, was sitting on camp beds in a little rented cottage on the coast in Cornwall, drinking it out of tooth mugs, because that's all we had in the place. We went for it was a New Year's holiday. It was myself and Abby. It was Dominique and his, had he married Anne Roumier, or anyway, either girl. No, I think it was a girlfriend, and it was the first time any of us had met her. Also, André Ostertag from Alsace and his partner, Christine. And I remember with André, we went to meet Dominique and Anne at Heathrow to pick them up. And Dominique had told us, I got this new girlfriend. She's the most beautiful girl in the world. She's incredible. And so we were waiting as people come out for having collected their bags. And every time a pretty girl came out, do you think it's her? No, not pretty enough. Do you think it's her? No. And then out came Anne with Dominique. We thought, okay, yeah. Yeah, I think so. So we all went down and had this magical end December over the New Year's week's holiday in a rented cottage down on the coast in Cornwall. It was great. Anyway, that's a nice note to leave you on, unless we have any more questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening.